Welcome to another edition of It's Your City. My name is Jim Shirk, Carson City Board of Supervisors, Ward 4. I'd like to start today's program by going back to January 5th, a board meeting. In particular, agenda item 23A, board appointments, which dealt with Mayor Pro Tem. At that time, I voiced my opinion that this position should be shared equally among all board members on a rotating basis, allowing each to serve our community for 1 year before passing along this unique position to another board member. The board rejected this often used procedures that other cities routinely used. Also at that meeting, we had addressed agenda item 23B. This item dealt with a resolution that would basically allow the city manager or a predetermined board member to testify before the legislature stating the board's position was a majority, regardless of the vote. It further states that no elected board member may, on his or her own, testify as a representative of the board during this same legislation session. I alone voted against this for 2 reasons. The first, whomever may testify could falsely report the vote of the elected board members by saying it was a majority, when in fact it had only been a simple majority, such as 4-1 or 3-2. Secondly, I believe no resolution should take away my right to have a voice as elected official. Next on the agenda was Moss Adams. They were requesting $50,000 for a project named Lean Management Training and Greenbelt Certificate. I alone voted against this due to the fact that other similar programs have not been completed, and those that have been completed never achieved the goals that they were obligated to fulfill. Moving on to agenda items from February 5th, I'd first like to talk about 19B through 19E, which dealt with Clear Creek Avenue and the purchasing of the right-of-way for making improvements to the sewer and the roadway. All of these were approved by the board with a 5-0 vote. An interesting fact came from this agenda item. I specifically asked, when must a business impact statement accompany an agenda item? The district attorney addressed this issue at the board meeting and will be following up with an email to all board members outlining how this applies to all future agenda items. Next was agenda item 20C. This dealt with the hiring of the professional services to provide the architectural design for the downtown narrowing of Carson Street, which also includes Curry Street. But here is the dilemma. Staff also included 3rd Street Plaza into this same agenda item. The drawback with attaching all of these projects into one agenda package is Carson Street and Curry are funded by the 1/8 cent sales tax, while 3rd Street Plaza is funded through redevelopment funds. These are 2 completely different funding sources, 2 completely different projects. The premise that these 2 projects had to have been linked together to assure that each project would be compatible with the other, this assessment is totally unfounded and groundless, as each project should have been brought to the board individually, because each project could have been compared with the other during the design process. Mainly because these 2 are in fact 2 separate projects and will be designed separately and should have been presented as 2 different agenda items. I know you realize I fully support 3rd Street Plaza as the funding came from redevelopment, while the narrowing of Carson Street came from the sales tax increase, which I have opposed in the past. So for this reason, I voted no on this $1.1 million expense. Before addressing the next agenda item, I want to point out that at a previous board meeting, the reduction of property tax from $356 to $354, at that time I recommended that the 2 cents should be set aside rather than just deleted from our budget. And for those who followed the meetings, the board did not agree with me and they voted against this concept, which brings us to agenda item 21B. At this meeting, this was to reduce the property tax from $354 to $352 of $100 assessed value of property. The board voted 5-0 in favor of this. What is most interesting is the 2 pennies from this reduction will be set aside into a separate fund for capital improvements only, which will help to fund maintenance, repair, or improvements of capital projects, which we are desperately need throughout our community on numerous projects. This will net the city roughly $100,000 a year. And if the other 2 pennies from the previous board meetings were applied, as I suggested, we would have doubled this amount. And it could possibly have been used for bonding purposes to repair, maintain, or improve capital projects. I would have hoped that the 2 cents from the prior board meeting would have been applied, but it was not. And moving on to agenda item 23A, had been to establish the process by which the board will use for the appointment of the Carson City treasurer since Al Kramer had resigned from his elected position. This passed with board approval of 5-0. Moving on to agenda item 23B. This had been in reference to SB 11, a bill that would allow the board to exercise powers they deem necessary for the effective operation of city government. To better help you understand this concept, it is to overturn the Dillon's rule, which has been in place for the past 120 years, which only allows local governments the powers expressly granted to them on a reasonably implied method, such as the Dillon rule states, if there is a reasonable doubt as to whether the city government has a specific authority, the assumption is that it does not. Furthermore, our own city charter and municipal code are constructed under the per se Dillon premise, such as the board only has the powers detailed under the state and county law. SB 11 grants, in my opinion, an unknown power to the board which they can execute at their will if they simply find a void in either the state or county code. And without the Dillon rule in place, it is highly probable that they, the board, could find a loophole. Because SB 11 will grant powers to local governments to perform certain acts or duties which are not prohibited or limited by statute, I alone voted against this bill. Next, I'd like to talk about the agenda items I had requested at the board meeting, and to give you some background on how agenda items are provided. Presently, one citizen sought to have an agenda item about RTC, and it was granted. A supervisor has the unique ability to simply make a suggestion for an agenda item, and that too was granted. A supervisor made a motion for an agenda item, and no second was required or made, and this agenda item had been granted as well. At the board meeting, I received instructions on how any of my agenda items or proposals will be accepted, and I was given an outline as to how we can move forward after I made these proposals. So I will address this as I present my agenda items as to how we may proceed forward. And the first one I brought up was I wanted the increase for hookup fees for water and sewer for all new construction not yet submitted to the city. We have increased rates on our citizens, but have not increased in similar fashion on new construction. Staff time required for this, they would only have to simply produce and bring to the board the limited increases that have been produced in the past, and that would be a limited staff time requirement for them. Next, I asked for a study of Fuji Park and to see what we can do to potentially grow the events besides just the state fair. Staff simply does not have that much to prepare for, as this would mostly be a discussion at the board meeting as to how we can accomplish this goal. Next, I asked that the new athletic center, the MAC, should have a scheduling coordination between the Parks and Recreation, the Boys and Girls Club, and the Carson City Visitors Bureau. Quite possibly, there is a need for a scheduling position between the various city entities for usage time of any city facility. This agenda item would simply require the three bodies to present their blueprint for the times they wish to access the MAC, and some staff time will be required to put this agenda item together. Next, I asked that any and all meetings, such as commissions or committees or boards, in particular, I did mention the V&T, debt management, and the city library, but there are others. And what they must do is they must come forward and use the Sierra Room at a time convenient for citizens to attend, where it can be televised. Additionally, I asked that all agendas will have their backup material for all of these meetings, and it should be posted on the city website. There will be some limited time required for staff to prepare for this agenda item. It would not be more than a discussion at the board meeting, who would then vote in favor of the guidelines. Then staff simply has to email all parties to the new standards they must comply with. A limited time for staff. Next, I asked to look at waste management contract. Specifically, the section that requires a private citizen must use only waste management container to haul trash and debris from a construction site. Staff simply has to prepare this agenda item by producing the contract that deals specifically with the element of this, the citizen's requirement to use waste management container. A board discussion would ensue, either to support the contract as it is or amend the contract, allowing citizens the right to use any container. Next, I asked that the Brewery Arts Center should give a presentation to the board regarding the new direction they have taken with the reduction of the operational staff. There is no city staff time involved with this agenda item, as staff simply has to make a call and request BAC to prepare their presentation and come before the board. Moving on to another agenda item, I asked that since we are partners with Eagle Valley Golf Course, that we, the city, should have a voice in the fee structure of all charges that are now being implemented at the golf course. Staff time, again, would not be much, that it would simply only have to call Eagle Valley, asking them to present the fee structure to the board for approval. My next agenda item I asked for was citizens committees, boards, and commissions serve a purpose. However, we need to review the purpose and the need for each of these groups, as city staff must attend each and all of these meetings at you, the taxpayer's expense. Granted, there will be some staff time involved in this. I certainly could not predict how much. However, the reduction in the numbers would certainly recoup the cost of staff involvement and bring a savings in the future. In my final agenda item, I brought up the fact that the mayor, in his State of the City address, brought forward the mall project behind the Nugget, saying it was moving forward. No staff time is required for this agenda item. Staff, again, simply has to pick up the phone and call either NNDA or Bruce Robinson at NIA, ask them to come before the board to discuss exactly what this project entails. This project will have the biggest impact on our community, more so than anything else in the next 10 to 20 years. The public should no longer be kept in the dark about this project. If we are to have an open and transparent city government, then this project should be brought forward into the public arena. I want to thank you for your time today. Please stay in touch with your elected officials by either emailing or calling them. They are open to suggestions and to your concepts of how we can better our city. I appreciate your time. As I said, my name is Jim Shirk, Carson City Board of Supervisors. and thank you.